My name is Michael Fromm, and on behalf of my fellow board members of This World, the Values Network, I take great pride in welcoming you to the first annual International Symposium on Jewish Values. If you attended any of today's earlier sessions as part of this unique two-day gathering, I trust you had a fulfilling and productive experience. In just a few moments, our distinguished panel will engage in an important and timely discussion on the question, can Judaism provide direction for non-Jewish America? In fact, this is the very question that the Values Network attempts to answer through an ongoing series of lectures, debates, educational programs, and a newly expanded website. The organization is now entering its third year under a very simple mandate: to bring core Jewish values to mainstream America as a way of healing and strengthening families, diverting society's focus away from material greed, and inspiring children to emulate caring, compassionate relationships. One of our cornerstone initiatives, Turn Friday Night into Family Night, has captured the attention of the media and is sparking a national trend to reserve one night of the week without modern distractions to spend with family and friends. Very shortly, you will be introduced to Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, if he's here, Dennis
Rabbi
Prager,
Steinsaltz, you just never know.
Marianne Williamson, Michael Steinhardt, Rabbi Joseph Telushkin, and Rabbi Kenneth Brandon. Our highly acclaimed panelists are certainly no strangers to Jewish values and have all wrestled in some way with the question of how Judaism can be a healing influence in a contemporary world. We're grateful for their willingness to share their insights with us this evening. But before we meet our panel, allow me to tell you a little bit about our moderator and Values Network founder, Rabbi Shmuley Boteach. What he lacks in physical stature, Shmuley more than makes up with a lengthy list of accomplishments and accolades. If there's a superlative beyond prolific, it would routinely be used to describe him. During his 11-year tenure as the head rabbi at Oxford University, Shmuley won the 1999 London Preacher of the Year competition, setting a record which stands today for the most points ever garnered in the competition's history. He's an award-winning syndicated columnist who's written 21 books, many of which have been international bestsellers. He's received the American Jewish Press Association's highest honor for commentary and hosted the critically acclaimed television show Shalom in the Home on TLC. Newsweek recently called him a cultural phenomenon. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, I give you our host for tonight's discussion and my very dear friend, Rabbi Shmuley Boteach.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for being here this evening. After having a very grueling day of lectures as part of the first day of the world's first symposium on Jewish values, we decided to create an evening event that would be much more informal and would be much more conversational with some of the leading panelists who joined us for the conference. And I have to tell you that this is a special panel. It's a unique collection of individuals. Those of you who are familiar with the Jewish world and well beyond will know what an anomaly it is to have people of this caliber all join together. So let me first and foremost introduce our panel, and then I will tell you what we're going to be focusing on this evening. Let me first thank my dear friend Mike Fromm for his introduction. I don't know where Mike went. Mike is the chairman of our board of directors and integrally involved in all operations of our organization. Without you, I really could not run this organization. Thank you for your friendship, Mike, at all times. Okay, to my right, Dennis Prager, one of America's... Dennis is one of America's most celebrated radio talk show hosts, but even his vast global audience of millions does not do him justice, because Dennis is one of America's premier public intellectuals. He is a thinking man's radio host. He is a radio host. And most of the people who were on the air, and I know this because when I was in syndicated talk radio, one of the secrets was we all listened to Dennis. We would basically steal his ideas, and then we'd go and broadcast as if they were our own. Dennis is the author of many international best-selling books. His columns are read by a global audience of many millions as well. But more than anything else, he is the premier exponent of Jewish values in the United States through his daily syndicated talk radio program. And he's been doing this for 20 years. And he's had an impact on our entire generation. He's come all the way from Los Angeles for this event. He has been my dear friend for 20 years, and I thank him for his graciousness in coming pro bono to participate in this conference. Dennis and I are going to be going to Zimbabwe next week with Rock Up Africa, a Christian evangelical organization that helps raise money to buy mosquito nets and medicines for 1,000 children that are in an orphanage just by Victoria Falls. You're going for the orphans, I'm going for Victoria Falls. But we'll have a nice time. At least Marianne gave me a laugh for that one. Okay. And we're going to be there for Thanksgiving together, God willing. Sitting next to him is America's most successful disseminator of Jewish knowledge, Rabbi Joseph Telushkin. Rabbi Telushkin has achieved the impossible. He has taken great Jewish texts, like his book on biblical literacy and his book on Jewish wisdom, and now his small encyclopedia, ever-growing encyclopedia of Jewish ethics. He has taken core Jewish texts and popularized them, making them best-selling books for Jewish and non-Jewish audiences. And I don't think anyone thought this possible before you did it. And everywhere I go, my non-Jewish friends who are in academia, who are in politics, who are on television, they always rave to me about Joseph Telushkin's books. Dennis and Joseph, as you all know, collaborated on two that I know of, huge bestsellers that were definitive in bringing Judaism to the mainstream culture. Why the Jews, and the 9 questions people ask us about Judaism. Even though I read those like 20 years ago, you see how well I still remember the titles. And thank you very much for being here, Rabbi Joseph Telushkin. We really appreciate it. Okay, in the middle of the panel is Michael Steinhardt. Michael really requires no introduction. Michael is America's most celebrated Jewish philanthropist. His philanthropy is legend. When you speak about Michael's philanthropy, Birthright Israel comes to mind, because Birthright Israel has become the most successful Jewish educational program, arguably in all of Jewish history. And we're not a young people, we're an ancient people. But they have taken 250,000 Jewish youth between 18 and 26 to Israel free of charge and introduced them to Jewish identity, Jewish heritage, and of course the state of Israel. But that's only one of the many things that Michael and Judy Steinhardt, and Judy joins us as well, and thank you very much for being with us, even though you're all the way at the end. I don't know if it's me or Michael who sent you all the way to the end there, Judy. But all the philanthropy that the Steinhardts do is quite legend, including our organization, which Michael founded with me about 3 years ago. And on behalf of all of us who benefit from Michael's tireless efforts to assist every aspect of Jewish education and well beyond, whether it's the Metropolitan Museum of Art or the Steinhardt School at NYU, there's so much that Michael and Judy do, and thank you very much for joining us this evening, Michael. And sitting next to Michael is the one and only Marianne Williamson. And not only is Marianne the only woman on the panel, and maybe if any women want to come and volunteer to join her, just raise your hand. Marianne Williamson is arguably America's most celebrated spiritual teacher. She was not only made famous by Oprah, and Marianne has been her personal spiritual teacher for so many years, but in her own right, Marianne, all her books are huge bestsellers, #1 New York Times bestsellers. I did a panel here with Marianne, and I saw firsthand, although we were already colleagues on Oprah and Friends, broadcasting a daily radio show, really when I just saw the profundity of her thought that night. And I want to tell you, so much of what you said has stayed with me, so much so that I'm actually writing a book about Jewish values now for basic books, and you are in the first, I sent you an email, I think, about that you are in the first 2 lines. For something that you used here, you said that one must always honor one's incarnation. And that really stayed with me, about honoring the identity with which you are born. But Marianne draws audiences in there, thousands and thousands all around the United States. And it's really just a mark of our friendship that she was kind enough to come from California, be here for this event, and thank you very much. We really appreciate it. God bless you. And finally, Rabbi Kenneth Brander has become something of a legend in the Jewish world. First and foremost, because of the work that he did in Boca Raton, Florida, creating one of the most outstanding Jewish communities in the United States, showing vibrancy and dynamism. And I was telling Rabbi Brander before that I grew up in Miami Beach, and my community was so jealous of everything he was doing at Boca, because Miami Beach, Dade County has 1 million Jews, but everyone was looking at what he was doing. Is it Broward up there in Boca? Or Palm Beach County, in Boca, and Yeshiva University was wise enough to pluck him as the head of the Center for the Jewish Future. And so many of his scholars participated in our conference this morning. We'll be there with us again tomorrow. And thank you very much for joining us as well. And there it is, our panel. I also want to thank the Safra Synagogue, where we do so many of our events. I had a very close and warm personal relationship with Mr. Edmund Safra, who was a renowned philanthropist in his time and sponsored the Safra Lecture at Oxford University every year, which had to be delivered by a Nobel Peace Prize winner. So every time we do things at the Safra Synagogue, we were just so honored. And the rabbi of the Safra Synagogue and all the staff that work here are always so kind to our organization. And this is not only the prettiest shul in New York, but it was built with such warmth. It's a circle. Everybody's equal in the shul. There's no beginning, there's no end, so we're all the same. And thank you so much for hosting this all the time. You want to give us a quick opening?
It's a great pleasure to welcome you. Welcome all your panelists, distinguished guests. It's not the first time that we host Shmuley and his guests, and it's always gives us a pleasure and honor to have him here, especially disseminating Jewish values to the wider Jewish community and to the wider world. So,
okay, this is going to be a rapid fire panel. We're going to keep answers to a minimum. No one has been briefed about what I want to talk about other than the advertised topic about whether the Jewish community can make a mainstream contribution to non-Jewish America. But we're going to keep answers short. We're going to push people's buttons and try to really evoke authentic and genuine responses, even though Dennis today dumped on authenticity. We're going to try to evoke those authentic responses, and we're going to begin. Dennis Prager, years ago, you wrote an article. This is about 15 years ago, saying that the Jewish community should actively proselytize non-Jews. And it was one of your most memorable articles. I remember that I wrote you a 10-page response to it, if you still remember that. And given the fact that the Jewish birth rate is so incredibly low, and given the fact that Michael, who is an expert in Jewish demographics, we've gone from 6 million Jews down to 5 million, you said today 4% of the population to 2% of the population, and that is due to assimilation, but especially to a low Jewish birth rate. Should the Jewish community reverse basically a 3 millennia approach in not actively proselytizing and become like the Mormons? The Mormons have caught up to the Jews after just 160 years of existence. There's 14 million Mormons, fastest growing religion in the world, 14 million Jews. We're 3,500 years older, but they field 60,000 missionaries. Good idea or bad?
It's a good idea, but my biggest thrust is that Jews talk to the world, period. A few years ago, I had an idea, and it was something I wanted to start in LA where I live, and that is bring a Christian home for Shabbat dinner. It ran into the following problem. The Jews who had Christian friends didn't have a Shabbat dinner, and the Jews who made Shabbat didn't have Christian friends. And that ended that brilliant idea that I had, one of many that fell before even being tried. But that really summarizes what I believe is the Jewish tragedy. Jewish Jews don't talk to the world, non-Jewish Jews talk to the world. Do you know how often I get a call or an email from a non-Jewish listener, and obviously having a national radio show, most of your listeners are not going to be Jewish. And very often, in total seriousness, the listener will write or say, Dennis, just want you to know you're the first Jew I ever met. And of course I'm not the first Jew they ever met. They've met Jews in their work, they've met Jews on television. I'm the first Jewish Jew that they ever met. Jewish Jews stay home. Jewish Jews, the more Jewish the Jew, I mean religiously, the more insular he or she is likely to be. Indeed, one of the biggest challenges I get from religious Jews is, Dennis, please, we have to work with Jews. We have so many lost Jews. When you talk to the guy, and Dennis, maybe one day, and Mashiach will come and talk to the guy. In the meantime, we got to worry about all the lost Jews. As if there was some sort of contradiction between talking to the world and talking to Jews. So that's the issue of proselytizing is way down the list of although I'm for it in a very sophisticated way. In other words, I don't want to turn Christians into Jews, but if someone has no religion, I see no reason why we shouldn't offer Judaism as everything else is offered. But that's secondary to the biggest single issue. We need to talk to the world from within Judaism. Jews who talk to the world proselytize for feminism, for environmentalism, for socialism, for every ism you can imagine, except Judaism and its values.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, so Dennis, you're saying that you would be in favor of proselytizing only for people who don't really have a religion yet. And why not offer Judaism? But the Orthodox are traditionally opposed to any kind of actively proselytizing. So, what would our sole rabbi on the panel? Should we be actively proselytizing non-Jews to become Jewish? I'm sorry. See, I think it's Joseph Telushkin as a world-renowned author and the sole Orthodox rabbi. I'm sorry. There's also Joseph Telushkin, of course. Yeah, right.
Do you want to answer the question? Well, first of all, Dennis, two comments. One is, thank God Yeshiva University has rabbis around the country, and if you want to work out some way in which we can have them open their homes to non-Jews, we should talk about that after the program. I don't think there's anything wrong with us extending ourselves and being able to talk to the larger world. I think that's our responsibility. However, I do believe that it's not our responsibility to become the largest religion. I think that Judaism believes that there's more than one way to heaven. If you're a good Christian, if you're a good Muslim, you can get to heaven. Maimonides actually writes in the Laws of the Messiah that in discussing actually the role of Jesus in the world, Maimonides writes, and these are his words in Hebrew, Yasher Derech HaMashiach, that even Jesus helped prepare the way to becoming the final Messiah by introducing forms of monotheism into the world. So I do believe that it's extremely important to recognize that every religion has purpose. We have to share the norms and mores of Judaism to the larger world. We don't believe in a Robinson Crusoe lifestyle. And I think it is healthy and important to reach out to the larger Jewish community and the larger world community. I often find that the Orthodox community understands the larger world community better than it understands the larger Jewish community. And I think that, in many ways, for the Orthodox community is a bigger challenge. I think it's easier for Orthodox Jews to interact with Christians than it is their friends who are not observant. Let me just end with one statement. You know, in Rabbi Abadi's synagogue, the ancient customs which are found in the traditions of the Siddur that Rabbi Abadi uses in the synagogue, and I believe it's also in the Siddur of Chabad, is that every time you begin the prayer service in which you celebrate a rendezvous with God, you need to start off acknowledging the fact that we have a responsibility to love every human being and to engage in a relationship with every Jew. You can't begin a rendezvous with God without recognizing our responsibilities to humanity. And that's, in the essence, before you begin prayer to God, you have to recognize that point. So I think we have to teach those points. We have to teach them wisely, and I don't think there's any chasm between the responsibility to engage the larger Jewish community and to engage society.
Okay, well now I'm going to make this more of a talk show, because, I mean, fair enough, but the fact is, our numbers are plummeting, and there's 2 Jews left in America. And you can't support Israel once you fall below a critical mass, and we're up against Arab boycotts of 1 billion people, and there's only 14 million Jews. And as Michael Steiner said today, I think it was you, Michael, who said that in Europe, maybe it was Dennis, in Europe we've all but disappeared. And it was you who said it, right? And, I mean, you have 100,000 Jews in Australia. You have, 200,000 Jews in Canada, 600,000 in France. And then the numbers go really low. 200,000 in England. In the United States, down to 5 million, 2% of the population. I mean, Michael, numbers are important after all. We're not going to suddenly increase our birth rate vastly. Isn't proselytizing the only way to solve this dilemma?
No, I don't think so. I don't know if democracy is the right way to deal with most issues, but I think in the following area, I would truly be a Democrat. If we had a plebiscite in Israel or in the United States or in other countries that had large Jewish populations, and the vote was on the following: in order to become a Jew, do you have to go through an Orthodox conversion? I think in virtually every Jewish country in the world, the vote would be no. If you had a second vote, in order to become a Jew, do you have to go through any religious conversion? I think there too, but I'm not so sure, I think there too, the vote would be no. So, my feeling is become a Jew everywhere in the world. It should be a simple process of a voluntary judgment on the part of an individual who chooses to be Jewish, and that choice alone should be sufficient for that person to be recognized as a Jew. And that, in meaningful part, would deal with your problem.
Okay, well, interesting. But Michael, okay, so let's say, let me give this just a little. Okay, so let's say you're saying we should minimize standards of conversion, and that maybe the standards are high. My wife is a naturalized citizen from Australia. I married an Australian, and it took her 8 years of residency in this country to become an American citizen. And then she had to take a test. She had to be knowledgeable of American history. She had to know who our Congress people were, and our senators, and the basics of the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. So even countries have certain standards. But Joseph Delushkin, that's my little rejoinder before you get a chance to respond, Michael. But Joseph Delushkin, you write these books, and they sell to a very broad audience. And most Jews would be surprised to hear that. Because Jews are bored of their own tradition. They're convinced there could be no possible way that a non-Jew would be interested in their tradition. The average, Michael Steiner expressed it so eloquently in a speech he gave at the 92nd Street Y about 2 weeks ago, where he said that the sheer monotony of the Jewish Sunday school experience, I don't know the words you use, Michael, they're a lot more eloquent than I'm using now. It is such a negative experience that most people think that Jewish knowledge is so stultifyingly boring, they can't imagine that their non-Jewish friends would be at all interested in this. So do you think that the Jews have something that is of interest to the non-Jewish community?
I think we do. And another point I just wanted to quickly make was probably the most famous story of all in the Talmud is the story where a non-Jew says to Hillel, "Teach me all Judaism, I'm standing on 1 foot." And Hillel answers, "What's hateful unto you, don't do unto your neighbor." The rest is commentary. Zeal Gemara, go and study. In one form or another, how many of you know that story? Okay, virtually everyone. I told that story with one detail incorrect. If you know the story from the Talmud, what did the non-Jew actually say to Hillel? No, he said go and learn the rest, and I always say as important as the ethical principle is the principle of study. But what else did the non-Jew? What he actually said to Hillel was not teach me the essence of Judaism. If he did, it sort of makes sense that Hillel would have given this very universal sort of statement. We all want to make our religion sound appealing to other people. He actually asked him more in the nature of a legal question. He said to him, "Gaireni almanah, convert me to Judaism on condition that you can teach me Judaism while I'm standing on 1 foot." And it was in response to that question, and it's remarkable and rarely commented upon. He didn't emphasize ritual laws. He didn't emphasize faith for that matter. He gave the answer of the ethical lesson. So I think it would obviously indicate, here's Hillel, probably regarded as the greatest rabbi of the Talmud, and he wins in the Talmud. The Talmud makes it clear that they think he's right. But in Jewish life, Shammai triumphed. Shammai, who chased the non-Jews away, is the one who really triumphed. So Hillel triumphed, and obviously he felt that the starting point for making Judaism known to the world is the ethics. So that's where he felt we had something distinctive to teach, and that's where we should start. I remember years ago when I was learning yeshiva, I had mentioned to Dennis, which Dennis then went on to make very well known, the law in the Mishnah that you're not allowed to ask the storekeeper the price of an item if you have no intention of buying it. That's an incredibly impressive law to people, Jews or non-Jews alike. You can't regard another person just as a means to an end. You have to take into account that person's time. You know, if there was a law, the sin we committed before you by wasting other people's time, we would say it on Yom Kippur, we did against our heart, none of us would think we had to do it. But if there's a law, you can't ask the storekeeper the price of an item if you have no intention of buying. It concretizes it. The genius of Judaism was that concretization. And that's something that we have a real practical thing. The laws of Lashon Hara, that you can't, that by definition Lashon Hara is true. The fact that it's true doesn't mean it's somebody else's business. So if we started making these things known, number one, we have the capacity to affect non-Jewish society, and along the way, there are tens of millions of unchurched Americans I think would be interested, and practically speaking, And you didn't even mention this detail, as you mentioned the frightening statistics of our decline in population. We're now talking about for over 30 years, there's been an intermarriage rate of 40% or higher. And if we don't want to write all those people off, we have to find a way to bring these people into the Jewish community.
Okay, so Michael believes that we should find a way to bring them in the community by making conversion standards more easier, I guess. Would you agree with that statement? Is that what you're saying as well? Focus on the ethical more than the ritualistic?
Focus on the ethical more than the ritual, but the religious component of Judaism, and I know because Michael and I have had this discussion, I think the religious component is very basic, but I'm saying also that the entry point, and I do believe in making the standards more accessible to people, not to the extent that Michael was saying, where it seemed to me it would be a much more easier just a statement of declaration, but nonetheless, Hillel's emphasis on going study was made actually to the non-Jew even after he then converted him. So we need people to go on studying, and we need to do it. And there are basics within Judaism, but we're not there to try and make it as a barrier to people. We want to bring people in and make it much more accessible.
But just before I bring Michael back into this conversation, just a moment. Okay, so we're going to come back to this in a second about standards, but moving to Marianne Williamson for a moment. I mean, talking about Judaism not appealing to people, and if the Jews feel it doesn't appeal to them, it's certainly not going to appeal to their non-Jewish friends. Like I said, the vast majority of Jews are bored with Judaism. I would say they probably never really tasted of it, but that's not what they think. They think that they experienced it, it's not for them, it's 3 times a year, and that's about it. Here you are, one of the 2 or 3 best-known spiritual teachers in the entire country. You're Jewish, but you don't seem initially to have found any kind of spiritual connection within Judaism. Correct, Marianne? I mean, is that fair or unfair?
It's actually unfair. I mean, if you talk to my family in Houston, no, I think people who know me, I mean, it's not part of my work in the world to talk about it, but I don't know how it could be more Jewish.
Do you think that we're a spiritual religion?
It's horrendous to me to even think otherwise. So I personally,
That's nice to hear.
I'm very uncomfortable with the idea of Jews proselytizing.
Really?
To me, it's part of the elegance of Judaism that we do not proselytize. I don't think it is the role of the Jew to get the message out. I think it's the role of the Jew to get the message in. I don't think that God has asked us to take our teachings out there. He has taken the teachings out there by putting us there.
So through our personal example as opposed to actively disseminating this knowledge.
Yes, but let's look at what that means. Example is too small a word. We are to embody something. And just by being in the world, we demonstrate something. Now, I also think in this idea of communication with non-Jews, I think that we do need to think in terms of taking responsibility for our affect. I think that that's true of every individual, and I think it's true of us as people. I don't think there's something about who we are. It is almost an oxymoron to say boring Jew. There's something about us that is noticed. And sometimes, as Jews, we can just be thinking, and other people will think we're frowning. I think that it behooves us to remember, especially given our history. And I think that part of the Jewish religion is that we exist within a history. It is part of our theology. And part of our taking responsibility for our children and our grandchildren is knowing that how people see us matters. So I think when the rabbi was talking about our love for all humanity, I think that there is something about every Jew taking that very seriously in how we come across to the world. I'd like to say something about when you were talking about our numbers. I mean, we are the only people in the world where there were fewer of us at the end of the 20th century than at the beginning. And of course that has to do with the Holocaust. And I can't tell you how many conversations I have been in with people my age. I was raised in a conservative home, and I have had so many conversations with women and men my age why didn't our, feeling stupid, I feel stupid that I only have one child. I feel like, in addition to just it being on a personal level, my deepest regret that I didn't have more, why didn't my parents ever say, breed? Because we lost so many. And I regret that. But I don't feel that the answer is to just try to get people to become Jews, which almost by definition, there's a dilution of something. But I do think the idea of teaching our children the meaning of this and the significance of this is obviously what the Orthodox have done, and I've certainly tried to pass that message on to my daughter.
Okay, very interesting. Okay, so the message of Jews, as we've gone through one round, I asked, should we be proselytizing? Dennis seems to be saying yes, but it's not our first priority. Michael Steinhardt believes yes, but make it easier. Rabbi Brander feels no, because other religions have authenticity. Rabbi Telushkin feels yes, the standards should be a bit more ethical than ritualistic. And true to what you said the last time you were here, Marianne, you believe people should honor their incarnation. They should not become something they weren't.
No, I'm not saying that at all. I think it's beautiful when people convert to Judaism. I don't feel, when I said honor your incarnation, I didn't mean you have to say the religion of you or you must honor it, but I think the notion that people can convert is a beautiful thing when their heart feels impelled to it. I don't think that they lack that knowledge that they could convert though. No, I'm not saying non-Jews should not convert.
Right. Okay. Go ahead, Michael, please.
I think we're getting the wrong impression in terms of numbers. We're not declining, period. There are a few places that we're declining. Europe, I think we've lost the critical mass in a lot of countries, and it's going to be very difficult for us to maintain a population, say, in Italy or in Holland or in other places where we have 25 or 30 or 40,000 Jews. But in the United States, we're no longer declining. So it's not a matter so much of the numbers, but what we're missing. And this is a very important point, and it's a hard one to make, is that there is, I'm tempted to say, a silent majority, that peculiar phrase of a recent political administration, amongst the Jews. And that silent majority are those people who have largely abandoned Jewish religion, who are out there, who are sort of Jewish, who are mostly in-married, but not necessarily in-married, who identify with Judaism loosely. I see tens of thousands of these sort of people on birthright, because they go because it's a free trip, and they know that if they have a grandmother who was Jewish, or some other remote relationship that's Jewish, they are entitled to go on a birthright trip.
Do you want to consider them Jewish?
But they consider themselves Jewish. But in this room, amongst the people here this morning, they have almost nothing in common with the people in this room or the people there this morning. And they have no representation amongst the people here today or this morning. And it's that I find frustrating, that it's that mass of Jews who may have their kids' bar mitzvah, maybe not, who may have a Jewish wedding, maybe not, who are slowly disappearing. And we're doing nothing about it because we don't have the slightest resources or inclination to do anything about it. And when you see a birthright group from Missouri State Teachers College, anybody here know any Jew who ever went to Missouri State Teachers College? Well, guess what? There really are Jews from Missouri State Teachers College. And you see them on birthright trips. And you see them from all sorts of strange places. But you don't see them in this room. They have no representation here because the people in this room have a very different and more intense and more sophisticated sense of Judaism, and we don't care about those people.
Okay, well okay, so end of round one. Now we're going to ramp it up a bit with round two, because I'm going to take off from what you said. Give us Dennis. Okay. So Michael, you're saying that there's tons of people out there, and there aren't low numbers, they just don't want to affiliate. They come to Birthright because it's free, and that's when you begin to find them, and Birthright found a way to reach them. Well, let me just turn it on its head for a moment. The last time we were here in this room, Marianne Williamson publicly criticized me, and you were right, for not talking sufficiently about God. You remember that? You criticized... You criticized me, and you said that we religious people in general, not even speaking about Jews in particular, have an issue talking about God because we don't want to appear like we're backward, like we're antiquated, like we're primitive. We want to appear so sophisticated. But you talked about God to the heavens on Oprah and Friends, and we discussed all of that. And you prayed on the air, and you spoke to Oprah about the importance of having God specifically. Michael, maybe the reason is that the Jewish no one affiliates with us because they don't think we stand for anything. They don't think we stand for anything. Most people think that the Jews are good at making money. They're not good at spirituality. And that was really the point that I was making to you, Marianne, that here you come, you're a Jewish woman becoming one of the most famous spiritual teachers in America, but no one connects the dots because they don't see the Jews as a spiritual people. They see them with good families, they see them with good communities, but not as spiritual. Which is why I'm actually surprised to hear from you, I'll let you come back in just a moment, that we should be out there talking about this, because Eckhart Tolle goes on Oprah and he says that from the Eastern tradition he's learned all this stuff, and Deepak Chopra says that from the Vedic writings and from Hinduism he's learned all this stuff, and the Dalai Lama says from Buddhism I've learned all this stuff. So why shouldn't we Jews be saying that, you know what, there's something to learn from us as well, and we are a spiritual tradition? But just before we get to that, I actually want to bring it back to Dennis. Because Dennis, you're the one who pioneered talking about things like God on the American airwaves. It started with your Religion on the Line program in Los Angeles, and no one thought you would succeed because of it. Everyone thought that what you were writing and what you were saying would bomb, that you were a once-a-week radio host and you would just really not go anywhere, and you would be reduced to publishing ultimate issues, but you've achieved this great national presence. Why is it? Do the Jews have something to say to the world or not?
Well, that's my point, with the risk of repeating myself, but I am a believer that repetition is the mother of pedagogy, so I'm willing to do it. We have an immense amount to teach, but we don't. Look, the problem, I have a more dark view of the problem, perhaps, than some. Most Jews' identity is not Jewish. It's not Christian. Most Jews' identity is that they are not Christians. This is what animates them. They couldn't care less about being Jewish unless there was an anti-Semitic uproar somewhere. But their real passions are making sure that they never touch a Christmas tree. This gives Jews deep meaning in their lives. If they can fight the appearance of a Christmas tree, God forbid a creche, in front of City Hall, this gives them meaning. This is a mitzvah. This is as close to a mitzvah as Jewish life gets outside of Orthodoxy. To fight Christianity, to make sure that there are no Christian symbols anywhere, to remove, as the battle I fought and lost in Los Angeles County, there was on the county seal of Los Angeles, was of all the things on the seal, the tiniest was a cross, which was fought by a lot of Jews in the ACLU and some non-Jews, of course, and they won. And I found it to be reprehensible. The city, after all, is called Los Angeles, not Los Secularistas. And if it was Los Secularistas, then I would expect nothing on the seal. That would be perfectly appropriate. But Christians, Catholics, founded it and called it the angels. We were erasing history in the name of separation of church and state. So it's worse than Jews not advocating anything from Judaism. Jews are more destructive than constructive in the social role that they play that animates them as Jews. I'm sorry to say. Now, you may disagree with me and think it is one of the grandest achievements of Jews to get rid of the cross on the seal of Los Angeles or to get rid of Christmas trees at universities. I don't. I think it is an immense tragedy. And it is not, it's not a value, it's an anger. So, to make it all come back, of course we have a lot to advocate, but you actually have to believe in Judaism in order to advocate it. But I'm sorry to say, what I said earlier, most Jews who believe in Judaism do not talk to the world, and the Jews who talk to the world, most of them do not believe in Judaism.
Okay, well let me immediately bring that to, I'm going to stretch here a bit and say to our Brandon that Dennis Prager is criticizing you as an Orthodox Jew as well, because the Orthodox are very insular, and they naturally cordon themselves off from the rest of the world, and even perhaps see their preservation in not interacting with the non-Jewish world. They will make brief forays into the non-Jewish world. They'll go to university and learn to be an accountant, etc. But their social life, etc., is really not around non-Jews. I'm not sure many of them would even invite non-Jewish people to their houses for Shabbos. So Dennis is saying, this is not sustainable. If we have something to say, we ought to say it. And you would think that if it is based on Jewish knowledge and Jewish identity, that the Orthodox would be at the forefront of sharing this, but we see the opposite. That in the Orthodox world, there's almost no interaction with the non-Jewish world. Some might even say that the Orthodox are a bit contemptuous of the non-Jewish world. I can only speak for myself, that I'm seen as this controversial Orthodox rabbi. The controversy started when I was at Oxford. I ran a Jewish organization. We had 5,000 non-Jewish members. We had non-Jewish presidents. It was Mayor Cory Booker of Newark, our first identifiably non-Jewish president, who made me controversial, because what are the non-Jews doing in your organization? There was no expectation that at Oxford, maybe non-Jewish people saw us as having something to say, and I was severely criticized for it when I thought I was doing something good. So how do you deal with Dennis's criticism that we just don't want to engage the world, and we just don't offer anything?
Well, first of all, it's very hard for me to speak on behalf of Orthodox Jewry. I'm just trying to speak on behalf of myself, and that itself is a little challenging. I have a few different points. One is that I think it's extremely important that the Orthodox community recognize that it doesn't need to be insular in order to guarantee its immortality and eternality, that it does need to engage the larger Jewish community. Which, Shmuley, as you know, is you have children at Yeshiva University. I think that we make it our business to make sure that the young men, young women, the rabbinical students, and the entire student body understands this responsibility to engage not just in the larger world community, which I actually think for Orthodox Jews is easier than to engage in the larger Jewish community. I think the Orthodox community feels a lot less threatened by the larger world community than it does regarding engaging in the larger Jewish community. And I think it's extremely important that we find multiple entry points in which we don't just step in and step out, but we engage in a serious way, and we speak truth to power, and we engage. And I'm not here to give examples, but there's a plethora of examples that really celebrate that responsibility and that vision. It really represents the philosophy of what the Yeshiva University is all about. But I think that there's a larger issue here, and that is, while we don't speak about God, and while we don't speak about issues of great import, and that is, I think that we have not spent enough time ourselves understanding what God is. You can have somebody go through 12 years of Jewish education, and you can ask them to define their relationship with God, and they'll have difficulty doing so. They might be able to explain you all the laws of the Sabbath, every nuance of the law, and they might be able to explain many other details and nuances, important as they may be to choreograph one's religious life. I think we do ourselves a disservice that spirituality has been divorced from the Jewish educational system. And until we re-engage and understand that, we're going to suffer from that. That's number one. Number two is, and I think what Mr. Steiner has proves the point, and that is, I think that people are hungry for meaning and purpose in this world, and I think Birthright represents that. We have to make sure our Jewish institutions are more friendly. We have to create multiple portals of entry through which people, no matter whatever their religious feelings in this world are, whether they believe in Judaism, whether they're devout Jewish atheists, whatever their philosophy is, we have to find ways for them to feel comfortable in our Jewish institutions. How many synagogues do we walk into that there won't even be a kippah around for somebody who's not walking into the synagogue with a kippah? How many synagogues we walk into that they won't even announce the pages, let alone have a prayer book that's Hebrew and English in it. Those are simplistic ideas. There are larger. Synagogues have to have multiple portals of entry. They have to do multiple things to them. And if we don't create institutions like that, I think then we suffer the consequences. Rabbi Cook once wrote a very important essay called The Value of Atheism. He speaks about how all of the spiritual souls of one generation became atheists because Judaism became too much of a robotic religion. I think that we live in a society where even Orthodox Judaism has become robotic. It's become, there's a lot of books that come out every single week in Orthodox Judaism, how to perform the details of commandment. There's very few books that come out to speak about the beauty of creating a mature relationship with God. We need to rethink our focus. We need to make sure that we create these multiple entry points. We need to focus on spirituality. And finally, I think that once we do those things, we'll create a certain level of comfort that the Orthodox community will also recognize its responsibility to engage not just the larger world, but the larger Jewish community.
Just before you go, Marianne, Dennis wanted to ask a question for Brenda. Go ahead.
Rabbi, it is a pleasant surprise to hear that Orthodox Jews are more comfortable with Christians than with non-Orthodox Jews. I've never encountered that, and if it's true, it's a remarkable revelation to me. Have you ever been in a church?
Yes.
Would you take a group of YU students to a church?
I have.
So you consider, it does not violate halacha?
Jewish law.
Well, we're we just wanted to think that. Listen, to suggest that every single halachas would concur with the perspective that it doesn't violate Jewish law, I would not be answering with integrity. But I think that there are enough halachas using some of the comments of the Baalei HaTosafos that define Christianity as a form of monotheism, that there are many poskim that would permit one to walk into a church. Most recently, we had the opportunity to bring several of the rabbinical students from Yeshiva University to the Auburn Theological Seminary to engage in a conversation with divinity students, and actually to run a trip to Israel and to the Palestinian territories together to begin to have conversations of that nature. And these were Orthodox rabbinical students, and I actually was the teacher of the group. So I think it is possible. I think it's on the envelope. Are there people who think that what I'm saying is heresy? I think both within the Christian community and the Jewish community, the answer is yes. But I do think it's possible, and I do think it is possible to do it within the norms and mores of Jewish law.
Okay, I want to crank up the pace again. Okay, we're middle of round two. Joseph Telushkin, come on, let's all be honest, because a lot of us are coming. And look, I've spoken to many audiences in public, and often we feel we're defending a position. And I want to make this conversation more honest and more truthful. Jews do seem to have a problem with God. They just do. There seems to be a deep discomfort with God. Michael Steinhardt is the most celebrated Jewish philanthropist in the entire United States. 6 million Jews, everyone knows who he is. Michael speaks openly about how he doesn't necessarily believe in God. Jews have an issue with God. Marianne, I know that you feel the same way because you said in here, why do we have a problem with God? I mean, if that's what we're supposed to be about, and Dennis is saying it as well. Evangelical Christians will speak openly about God. And Muslims, inshallah, well, I'm not going to say Allahu Akbar because it's become it has a different connotation these days, but they speak openly about God. Jews just have this issue with God. Why? What do we find it backward? Are we too sophisticated for it? What is it?
I think in life in general and in religious life also, people's strengths tend to be their weaknesses. So I think if somebody's intellectual, they have a tendency to rely disproportionately on their intellect and not sufficiently develop their emotions. The phenomenon of girls who are cheerleaders in high school who don't develop other parts of themselves. Judaism's great strength is halacha, the idea that you don't have abstract ideals, but you concretize them in specific behavior. Christianity's great strength is faith. And I think the potential weakness that each encounters is there is the possibility in Christianity of over-reliance on faith. You know, in the case of Luther, who elevated faith into the greatest of all things. As long as you have faith in Jesus, you will be saved, even if you commit thousands of murders, is what Luther literally said. And I think the Jewish weakness is to concretize everything into halacha. And you say, well, what about Reform Judaism? They went off in a different direction. They'll develop different types of halachas. You know, they could be more concerned with environmental issues, or or something like that. But we underdeveloped, I think, speaking about faith. That was an old, critique that they had, that many Jews, this was a critique directed at the Orthodox world, but...
Oh, it was a critique that the Christians had.
No, right. That many Jews had developed, instead of Yiras Shamayim, instead of fear of God, fear of the Shulchan Aruch. By the way, it applies across the board. I remember when I was a student of Yitzhak Greenberg's at YU, Yitzhak used to say, I don't care what denomination in Judaism you belong to, as long as you're ashamed of it. Because, he meant each of them was insufficient in developing it, but I think we lost out tremendously in not developing that spiritual component. And I think we need more. I think it's because, as I'm saying, I think we have a great strength, but I think that was where we, so to speak, erred, and we overly relied on that.
Okay, well, let me turn to Michael for a moment now. Okay, so remember, the focus of this evening is really about the Jewish contribution to the non-Jewish world. But what we're focusing on, and I don't want to lose that thought, but what we're focusing right now is if we don't have any core spirituality, and if we don't believe that we have any innate values, connection to God to offer ourselves, then we have nothing to offer the world. Michael, this is a quintessential question that everyone has for you. The fact is that you have spent tens of millions. There was one quote, Michael, that you had spent $100 million in Jewish education and you felt that it had failed. That was a quote from you in JTA. And on the one hand, you're the biggest critic of orthodoxy, and you've criticized it even tonight. On the other hand, the fact is that almost all the people that surround you in terms of who you work with, they're largely orthodox, and...
Keep your enemies close.
And it's almost like you're not getting the message that without God and spirituality, Judaism is sort of like an empty shell. Your son-in-law David tells you that repeatedly, and I've sat at lunch when we've heard that message. You acknowledged it the other day in your 92nd Street Y speech. The world wants spirituality, but you keep on thinking that if I create a common Judaism, if we can create a religion, a Judaism without God, but if it's values-based, but even those values have to be rooted somewhere, but you still stubbornly adhere to this belief that I can create a new Judaism that is godless, that's going to appeal to all the non-affiliated, when the rest of America, non-Jews, who Marianne speaks to, and who Oprah Winfrey speaks to, and who Deepak Chopra speaks to, they want God. They want some sort of spirituality. And Marianne would say to you that you've got an issue with God. Okay. Well, Michael's going to respond and you'll go immediately.
Well, first of all, I think you have to separate the word spirituality from God for the moment, number one. Number two, Shmuley, I think you have to recognize that you and those who believe in God in the Western world have become the minority, not the majority. Has anyone seen the statistics about atheism in Europe? The majority of Europeans, if I read the Bible of the day, the New York Times, the majority of Europeans, the substantial majority of Europeans are atheists today. I wouldn't be surprised, and I haven't seen polls in the United States, but my understanding is that the United States is more religious than Europe, but it wouldn't surprise me if the majority of Americans are now atheists. But you operate, the Orthodox operate, as if they are the center of the religious world. They're not. They're off in some remote corner. And most of the people, most of the Jews, are not there. And the thing I find painful about even this conversation is that we talk about Jewish values, and we talk about the Jews, but we don't really capture the hearts and minds of most of our co-religionists. They aren't remotely where this conversation is, not remotely. They're in a very different place. I'm not sure we know where that place is, But I do know we're not touching it. And you notice we don't talk about the reform movement. We don't talk about the conservative movement. It's as if those movements don't exist for most of the people in this room, and frankly for me, because in some sense, intellectually, they don't exist. So it's those issues that interest me so much more, because that represents the quantitative future of our people, whatever we're presently speaking about.
Okay, well, let me just tell you. But you see, I disagree. Michael, the whole thing is, you're saying that this whole conversation is not going to reach the majority of Jews. The person sitting to the right of you is the one who is reaching them. See, the most influential person here on this panel, in terms of completely and utterly unidentified secular Jews, is Marianne Williamson. It's the spiritual teachers in America. Those Jews who you want to reach, they're doing yoga. They're studying Buddhism. So they want spirituality, and 90% of Americans do believe in God. And soon I'm going to ask Dennis to address what the non-belief in God has wrought in Europe, because you would argue that it's made Europe lose its moral compass. You talked about that with Dershowitz, and then I second shoot lie last week. But Marianne, am I not right? I mean, come on. You meet the most secular Jews. They come in their thousands to your seminars because they don't think they're going to find God in the synagogue. They're not going to find anything spiritual at a school, but they're going to find it through you. So Oprah brings you onto her show to talk about spirituality because that's what America wants. And it made her the most influential person, arguably, in American cultural history, bar none, because she's plugged into that spirituality. But Michael will steadfastly tell me that I'm wrong, and people don't want that spirituality. They want a more secular kind of values-based religion.
For me, we really need to step back here. In religion, there is the exoteric, the outer, and the esoteric, the inner. Jewish spirituality is very esoteric. It is an illumination within us. It really is almost irrelevant, or I would say what we say is almost irrelevant to it. My father used to say, I'm a Jewish atheist. It was like almost his joke. But let me tell you something. If you made a joke about God in his presence or did anything that he thought was against God, there would be such a fierce look. You know, it's like the old line, Jews don't believe in miracles, but we rely upon them. Jews, in our history, we certainly do not have to prove to anyone, much less to ourselves, about the light of the Jewish soul. I think, and then when Dennis was just talking about the Jews, who the only Jewishness they express is about the, the symbols, etc. I think the reason is because of what the rabbi said. There's an educational issue, and I think I, being a baby boomer, have totally experienced this. I grew up in a conservative home. I did not get bar mitzvah, but I was confirmed. I went to conservative Judaism. I went to Sunday school throughout. I don't remember learning anything about God. I learned about Mesopotamia. I learned about Jewish history. I didn't learn about God. And so then when my career started, I remember having dinner, I had a marvelous dinner one night with the chief rabbi of Holland. Somebody was talking about Holland. And he was telling me, this was several years ago, and he was telling me about, he had met this Indian spiritual teacher, Indian guru, who had invited him to come to India and visit his ashram. And when the chief rabbi of Holland went to India to visit his ashram, and he looked at all the young people there, he said, my heart broke. There was a bunch of Jews. Why were they there? Why were they in the Indian ashram rather than in the synagogues? And this was a conversation that was meaningful for me, because in my career also, when I found I was not taught the spirituality of my own religion. It's not that it wasn't there or isn't there. It's that it wasn't what I was taught. So when I first went out into the world doing what I do, teaching, because I found mystical food in A Course in Miracles, which is not a religion, it is universal spiritual themes, which I now certainly recognize in Judaism. And rabbis used to come up to me, almost angry at me, and they say, come here. And you could have, they all said the same thing to me, you could have found it here. You could have found it here. And I always said the same thing, you didn't teach me. You didn't teach me. And finally, an Orthodox rabbi said, sit down. I want to give you a history lesson. And he taught me about what happened after World War II. And he taught me that during World War II, the same percentage of teachers, scientists, doctors, business people escaped to the United States and elsewhere when the Holocaust was already up. But that the rabbis stayed there, and he told me the Yiddish term, God's not in America, meaning, understandably, if there's suffering of the Jewish people going on here, I'm not getting on the boat. So in the 50s, there was a big break. So my generation of Jews, too many times, simply didn't learn the spirituality of our religion. It's not that we didn't want it. And I think that's what's so interesting in displacing it onto the symbols. There's this hunger. So it's not that the Jews didn't want God. They did, but there was this break. And I think it's self-correcting in many ways. My daughter grew up for the most part in Jewish education, was in Grosse Pointe, Michigan, was in Detroit. She was bar mitzvah there. If I had the Jewish education that my daughter had, I assume I would be a rabbi. But it's not accurate to say that we're not, and so I think we do have a terrible problem in that a lot of Jews are almost like embarrassed of Judaism, and it is a terrible problem. But I think it's about educating our own. It's about educating our own, and for a generation of this correction to be made, because when Jews see the spirituality of Judaism, there is clearly no lack.
Okay, before we go to the last and final round before questions, I want to give everybody 1 minute to respond to anything that's been said until now, just very quickly, okay? 60 seconds. Go quickly across.
This might not come off PC, and perhaps I'd be better off not even saying it, but I'll say it anyways. With respect to the comments that Mr. Steinhardt has mentioned about orthodoxy, I do believe that your portion in the world to come is probably much greater than around 1,000 Orthodox rabbis put together for what you've accomplished. But I have to tell you something. I do believe that Orthodox Judaism, with all of its challenges, and I've articulated many, allows the rest of the Jewish community to experiment on various forms of spirituality because it guarantees our immortality. And I think we cannot forget that. And I think that needs to be stated.
Okay, thank you. By the way, Michael doesn't have a world to come. He sold it for $100,000. He told us this morning. It was a real bargain, $100,000 for Michael Steinhardt's world to come. But go ahead, 1 minute, please.
Can you sell it twice?
I can't afford it. Joseph, you want to respond to anything? 1 minute.
Yeah, very quickly, Michael, you put yourself at the center of it. I don't think Europe augurs well for the Jews. And I don't think in general in Europe, and I don't think the hostility towards Israel. And I think America is a very different thing. It's significant to me that the only Jew who's ever been on a national party ticket is Joe Lieberman. I think the trends might be moving in the opposite way of what you're thinking. Dennis and I, because we've known each other since high school, in '64 when we were in high school, and Barry Goldwater was nominated for the Republican candidacy for the presidency. The old joke was I always knew the first Jew nominated for president would be an Episcopalian. So it's interesting, and somebody then said to us, in 2000 will be a Jew on a national party ticket and he won't campaign on Shabbat. And the fact even that you say you think maybe the majority of Americans are atheists, first of all, statistically, I think there's enough to argue against it. But secondly, Lieberman was able to run, and it was known that he was a religious Jew. Could you imagine somebody trying to run for a national office in the United States declaring that they were an atheist? I think that alone would be a kiss of death for them in America, maybe not in Europe. But again, Europe, I don't think augurs well for the Jews. Now again, you're not going to come to belief or not belief because it's good for the Jews or bad for the Jews. If you believe, it's because you believe, and if you don't, it's because you don't. But you won't convince me that it's going to be good for us. Okay.
Dennis, thank you.
I just wanted to say something sympathetic to my fellow Jews since I've been critical.
Biggest defender of Judaism on this panel is Barry Ann Williamson. Okay, go ahead.
The problem.
What did you say?
So the single biggest defender of Judaism on the panel is Mary Ann
Why
Williams.
should that be a surprise?
I'm not surprised at all. I'm surprised because we rabbis are supposed to be doing this. Go ahead.
The question of God and Jews is a terribly complex one. Why Jews don't talk God talk? For decades I've said if you know a parent said to a child, God loves you, you can almost bet your house that it's a Christian saying to his child, not a Jew. Given that we brought to the world the idea of a God who loves people and who needs to be loved, we've drifted very far. But I do want to say on behalf of my fellow Jews that part of it is God's fault. It's the truth, and Jews know it. Every Jew is angry at God over Auschwitz. Every single Jew. I've never met one, no matter how long his beard, no matter how secularized theoretically he is, who does not feel some anger to God over Auschwitz. And frankly, if you don't, I'm puzzled. I don't understand why he wouldn't. He was put on trial by rabbis. They were obviously at least annoyed. If the Frum in Auschwitz could put God on trial, then we who live after can, if not put God on trial, at least we're allowed. That's one of the beauties of Judaism. We're allowed to have ambivalence vis-a-vis God. I always said the most lovable thing about God is that he demands that we love him. That is, to me, the lovability of God is in that famous thing, God knows he's not lovable. That's why he instructs us to love him.
Wow. Whoa.
That's always.
By the way, I'm going to back away from Dennis because, you know, the lightning can be off by about 5 feet. I don't want to get polarized.
I want you to
In this
know.
beautiful synagogue.
I actually feel that that's on God's behalf. He understands how hard life is for the vast majority of human beings, a world that he made, which, Dostoevsky said, to live means to suffer. And, the rabbis of the Talmud said it would have been better for a person not to have been born than to have been born. We have Job in our Bible. So let's be honest. It's a problem. Now, I have resolved it in ways, that will take too much time now. I will just say it in 3 sentences, hopefully. I believe God chose the Jews. That chosenness is a task to humanity. That is what animates me, and it has since I was a little boy. I believe in it 100%. Beyond that, I expect very little from God. I don't ask him for anything. He gave me the best book possible to guide my life, all the Torah. I try to do it. I try to touch other people with that great book, Jew or non-Jew. That's my task. I don't ask what God can do for me. To paraphrase John F. Kennedy, I ask what can I do for God. But I will say that it is very understandable for Jews not to have the most hunky-dory relationship with the Kodesh Baruch Hu at this time.
Okay, well, which brings us to the final round before your questions, and I got to tell you, Dennis's comment set the stage for what I want this last round to be about, and I think there are people who are bursting at the seams after that comment. So let me just introduce him the following way. I thought what you said was brilliant and ingenious, and it's one of the reasons I love you, Dennis, because you'll speak your mind. So let me just tell you what I mean. That why do Jews have to contribute to the non-Jewish world? Because for 20 years, all we've heard is that values represents opposition to gay marriage and opposition to abortion. That has been American values for 20 years. And I'm sick of it. Because I'm a human being, and I want to live God's law. I'm an Orthodox Jew. I wear this yarmulke that says that his law comes first, but I still have a heart. And when I just hear that, no, even if I accept those laws, I want to know that someone's wrestling and struggling in the same way we wrestle and struggle with God about things like Auschwitz. I want to know that I can remain a human being in my relationship with God. And I think that unless the Jews inject their values to this country, we're not going to afford Americans that opportunity. It's going to be these draconian rules that gays are destroying the country and people who have an abortion just hate life. And I'm not saying I would change those laws because I'm Orthodox. But we have the world's best-known openly Orthodox gay rabbi who's here tonight, Rabbi Stephen Greenberg, who's a friend, and thank you for being here. God bless you. And I have a gay brother, and I'm an Orthodox Jew, and I keep these laws. But I'm sick of hearing that those, because the other night, I got to tell you, I was at my nephew's bar mitzvah, and there was a family friend who was a friend of my brother's, a gay man, openly gay, who's dying of cancer, and he's weeks away. And he has a partner who wheeled him in and took care of him. And I saw the love between them. And yes, the Torah might say that is sinful. And I'll follow the Torah. I will. But I want to know that someone's heart breaks as you wrestle with that. That's all I want to know. I want to know that values can be experienced by human beings. I want to know that Dennis Prager can wrestle with God and say that and be one of the most committed Jews in America. I want to know that we Orthodox can respond to some of the criticisms we've heard because we still have hearts even as we adhere to our laws. And I know that you have that heart, and that's what you've been trying to express today. So, as I bring us to a close and give everyone the opportunity to focus on this particular thing, Michael, Everyone in American Jewish speculates about your atheism. It's one of the most talked about subjects in the American Jewish experience. It really is. And everyone is of the same opinion. And Michael Steiner really is not an atheist. Because he does too many mitzvahs, because how could a guy spend hundreds of millions of dollars of Jewish education and not believe? And I think what Dennis said right now is true. And I remember a conversation we once had. You told me that you used to say the Shema, I think, or you were becoming religious when you were a little boy, and then you learned about the Holocaust, and that's when you became an atheist. But you can't refute something you believe, because belief is, by definition, not subject to refutation. And it sounds more like it was payback, that you were angry at God, and that's why, even as you see these trends, that Americans are really looking for God. I gave the Oprah example. And the Dalai Lama, I give you so many examples. Europe is going in one direction, America is going in the opposite direction. That's why Bush was elected over 8 years. Even people hated his politics because the secularism of Europe doesn't necessarily appeal to Americans. Obama is a very religious man. A very religious man. One of the most contentious things in the election was his pastor, because he goes to church regularly. But the point is, Dennis is saying that you really are angry at God, and I happen to agree with that. And maybe if you accepted that, your philanthropy, which has guided so much of what the Jewish community has been doing for the past 20 years, you're the pioneer and the trendsetter. If you made peace with the fact that you can have this wrestling relationship with God, and you don't have to accept everything about Him, because we do have anger toward Him, then you would at least let Him in a little bit, and maybe your philanthropy would be more successful by your own definition, because you said you blew $100 million. Do you know what I could have done in the Jewish Values Network with $100 million? Could have bought myself a nice car. No. Anyway, go ahead, Mr. Steinhardt.
I became an atheist in my teen years, and I've been an atheist ever since. For most of my life, I was a guilt-ridden atheist. When I came back from school, from college, in my late teen years, I flaunted eating food in front of my mother on Yom Kippur, and maybe I was at that point an angry, guilt-ridden atheist, and that was important to me. And for much of those years, I remained a guilt-ridden atheist. And then I spent time visiting many of the world's great rabbis and asking them to cure me of that disease. Steinsaltz and Greenberg and many others, bring me back to faith. And it was an appallingly abysmal failure. The responses I got were horrible, were without meaning to me. And I ultimately went, I did other things, in part to try to deal with this atheism. I began to collect Judaica, thinking that if I could collect the precious objects of our people over the last 4 or 5 or 6 centuries, maybe through some process, that would bring me closer to the religion. So now I'm an atheist with a large collection of Judaica. In the last maybe 10 or 15 years, I've lost the guilt, but I haven't lost the atheism. So I am, and I say it loud and clear so no one will mistake it, I am an unequivocal atheist. Hardly anything I can envisage in this life is likely to change that. Period. And I do what I do because I deeply believe that those, I'll use the word values, even though I think the word Jewish values is misused, overused, underused. It's not something that's defined as narrowly as I would like. But I think I'd have no better way of explaining what's important to me. And what's important to me is that Jews have achieved more relative to their number in areas that I care about than most any other people. And it's that achievement in a whole host of areas that you're all familiar with, that humanitarianism, those things that I identify mostly with Jewishness, that I prize. And you don't have to be a believer. You just have to see the experiences of the last 200-300 years and recognize that there's something special in the Jewish experience. And that's what I care about. And it's almost as simple as that. And it certainly doesn't require a belief in the supernatural, which under other circumstances I would and could be very denigrating of, but I won't be tonight. But that is why I'm an atheist, and almost why I will almost certainly die an atheist.
Okay. First of all, that was very eloquent, but Michael, do you expect us to applaud?
No. I just wanted to
Yes,
say.
this was from the Marianne.
Okay, well, there's one thing that occurred to me, Michael, as you were saying it is, clearly you mentioned the rabbis that you've spoken to, and you found their arguments appalling, and obviously didn't make sense to you.
Yes.
But most people, if they would come to the atheist conclusion you came to, would find your arguments for the importance of Jewish continuity to make no sense.
Maybe.
Yeah, no, but I think that's the point. I think ironically, the continuity of the Jewish people, which is, I know, extremely important to you, will depend on Jews who do believe that there is some God-given mission, because we don't have a history of secular families going on generation after generation. Okay.
You jump to certain conclusions. I could believe, as I do, without necessarily there being Jewish continuity. It just so happens that the best bet for me in these values is the continuity of Jews. Certainly, it's not only Jews. So Judaism is a stream, is a small stream, but one that really works. Happens to be the stream I was born into. But to say that rabbis would dispute what my logic is, I don't understand that. Why do you think they dispute it? Why do you think they would dispute the fact that Jews have such an extraordinary experience in the 20th century? Do you think they would believe that Einstein and Freud and all those other secular individuals are a function of their rabbinic backgrounds or their Talmudic study or their anything else having to do with their religion?
Yeah, strangely enough, I think the fact that we came out of a religious culture that made study such a supreme act of significance, it got secularized,
but religious study ended largely a couple of hundred years ago, didn't it?
Even where it ended, you're talking about a tradition of study that ultimately was, this is Will Herberg's old idea, what he called cut flower ethics. Cut flowers look as pretty as regular flowers, but they ultimately are not going to be able to reproduce.
Well, the point is that what we've had in the last 300 years is not reproducible while the religious study is?
All I'm saying is this, that if the majority of Jews came to hold your beliefs about God's non-existence, I don't think the Jews as a people would endure.
Well,
I'm not saying...
I have the feeling we're going to find that out.
Okay.
Okay.
I hope not.
Okay, Marianne. Well, since Michael said that every rabbi on earth could not persuade him, Marianne.
Well, he didn't talk to everyone. There's a line in the Course in Miracles, there are many who conspire with God who do not yet believe in him. And that's what I was thinking about. And I think if there is a God, Michael's opinion is almost irrelevant. There either is or there isn't. And so, but I think that God is not about belief. God is not about theology, God is about experience. And what Michael has done with his life is to me the essence of the religious experience. So, you know, the words about atheism versus non-atheism, I think we can risk making almost that too important. And I believe that in Judaism, it is about how we treat each other. And I believe in what the rabbi just said over here about the immortality. I believe in both. I want to say to Dennis that I assure you there's at least one Jew who is not angry at God. And I'm not angry at God about the Holocaust. I went through that phase. I mean, I went to college, being a sophomore in college, and I was like, you know, I wrote my dear gentleman to God. But I'm not angry at God for making the law of cause and effect the building block of the universe and free will. And it was not God, in my view, it was not God who did that to the Jews. It was people who did that to the Jews and who allowed it to happen. And when I read the gates of prayer, when I read the Jewish prayer book, I see a God of justice and I see a God of love. That is that book. Am I wrong, Rabbi? This is about love, and we're to love.
I think you should come and teach it at our rabbinical school, actually.
So I don't know this. You know, if you make a genuinely theological analysis of world history, it is the same as an anthropological analysis or a historical analysis. Woodrow Wilson begged the Allies after World War I. It was the American president who begged the Allies, don't do this to the Germans. The Germans were squashed. The reparations for Germany after World War I were George Marshall would tell you to stop. They were a crushed people. And large groups of desperate people often, and can and are today, a petri dish of collective pathology. So the desperation of the German people, which with our higher values Woodrow Wilson argued against, played a very big part in the socio-pathology that was first stated by one man, but then reverberated throughout so many Germans. So to me, that was where the absence of God's love was. So I don't feel that God did the Holocaust. You know, we come, our book, Job says, how long, oh God, how long? But I think the point for our generation is to know that it's God saying to us, how long? You have 17,000 children. If you want to talk about Jewish values, 17,000 children on this planet die every day of hunger, 1 every 5 seconds. The only thing I would say to that, though, when you say Jews aren't out there with our values, that to me disputes the history of liberalism in America. When you look at the most progressive political movements in the United States, Jews are everywhere. So, I mean, that's just our political history in this country. From Martin Luther King, Civil Rights Movement, the Vietnam War, we're there. And then I just want to complete by saying in terms of myself, because it's interesting how you sort of see me and how I see myself in my career. My political activism, my starting nonprofits, social justice, people with AIDS, my political peace alliance, it's because I'm a Jew.
Well, Marianne, it goes without saying how proud we are that you are a member of our community. No, I remember watching Marianne for the very first time when I discovered your work 2 decades ago on Larry King, and but you know, even one night I'm in this hotel in Arizona, just about a year ago. I told you about this, and there's this magazine on the coffee table, and it's all about spirituality. There's Marianne, you know, the cover story. Marianne really has brought so many people closer to God, and our community really needs to reclaim you, because you're one of our very blessed daughters, and you've done an amazing job. I got to tell you something. On Oprah and Friends, Marianne was the highest rated radio host on our entire network. There were 7 of us, each one of Oprah's friends, each one did a different subject. So I did the marriage, parenting, relationships, and Dr. Mehmet Oz does medicine, and Gene Chatsky did finance. Marianne was our highest rated host. And the reason was she spoke so openly about God and spirituality. That's the truth, Michael, because she spoke so openly. Am I saying this accurately?
I don't know about the highest rated part.
You were the highest rated. They told me repeatedly. They told me how to compete with your ratings. So we're very proud that you are a member of our community. But even I disagree with you on the anger at God part, only because of the struggling spirituality. But I will pledge right now, God willing, that one of the next public events that our organization does, because this is such an important subject, is whether God is responsible for the suffering in the world. Because Michael's response is there is no God, therefore he's not responsible. Correct, Michael? And Marianne is saying he instituted the laws of nature, like cause and effect.
Well, and free will.
And free will. Which for me is just a little bit of deism, like Thomas Jefferson, which is fine, but we Jews believe in providence, so God could have laws, but he could override those laws. But we're trying to get to questions, so let me go to Rabbi Brander, please. But thank you very much, Marianne, for the very eloquent response. Rabbi Brander, go ahead, please.
Well,
Are you going to try to be one of the rabbis that finally convinces Michael Steinhardt? He's tried every other rabbi.
well, just two comments. One is, I think that there's a lot of important values that the Jewish people have given over to the world, and we have to continue to give over. First of all, the sacredness of time. In every natural order of time, days, months, and years. In Judaism, every 7 days, every 7 months, and every 7 years in Judaism, there's a notion called Shabbat. Every 7 days, we have the Shabbat we're familiar with. Every 7 months, there's a holiday known as Shabbat. Whether you count the Jewish New Year from the month of Nisan or the Jewish New Year from Rosh Hashanah, you have Passover and Yom Kippur that are called Shabbat. And every 7 years, you have the sabbatical year, which highlights our responsibility to step away from creativity, to step away from consumption, to step away from power, not because creativity, power, consumption cannot be used for good, but to reflect upon it properly. And I think that is an important idea that Judaism has shared with the world, and we have to continue to share with the world the sanctity of time. The second is the notion of rights, of the way we interact with people. Clearly etched within the Judaic norms and mores is the responsibility that we have to other people. The whole notion, without getting into it in any great depth, the whole notion of rights and privacy is clearly an idea that is found in the Torah in one of the most ancient codes of Jewish tradition. The whole notion of spousal rights is clearly something that is highlighted in the notion, in the ideals of Torah. And just one other idea, the whole notion of a synagogue, although there's an argument amongst Christian as well as Jewish sociologists, social scientists, archaeologists, when exactly the synagogue was developed. What is clear is that it really represents the idea of a synagogue really gave birth to the whole notion of churches, the whole notion of mosques, this idea of having gateways, places that we can communicate with God, each religion in their own authentic way. If I may, let me just add one other point. Around 15 years ago or so, my wife and I were blessed to have a child who died several days later. We found out that when she was born, my wife had a beta strep type of infection, and the American College of Obstetrics did not have practice protocols for how to treat this beta strep virus, bacteria infection, when the American College of Pediatrics did. So we went to visit our OBGYN, and we asked our OBGYN the next time a woman comes in with the same symptoms my wife had, which by the way our daughter would have been alive if they had just given my wife 3 doses of antibiotics, IV antibiotics, 3 doses, $5 worth of antibiotics, she would be alive. And the OBGYN responded to us and said, I went into obstetrics because I don't like to deal with death. I went into obstetrics because I want to deal with life. That's how this OBGYN answered this young couple. I walked away devastated, asking all the questions of why should this happen. My wife decided that she was going to create, with a few other women who had lost children, Jews and non-Jews, with the CDC, practice protocols for the entire country of what happens when a woman walks in with the beta strep virus infection. And she created practice protocols. And what I learned from that experience, and thank God we have 5 wonderful children at home, what I learned from that experience is that often, as a Jew, our question is not to ask, why bad things happen, but, and I think Rabbi Talishkin and Dennis Prager, I think you've written on this, not why things happen, but when things happen to us, as Marianne said, how we deal with them. And that really defines our free will, that really defines who we are. And I think that's an important message. God gave us the capacity to deal with tragedy, and I looked at what my wife did, and I think she's a hero for what she did. She was able to take a very difficult, dark time in our lives, and she found a way to make sure that we were able to at least transform that reality for others. And I think that that's a message that each and every one of us has to carry in the way we deal with challenges in our own lives.
Thank you. Well, Ravana, thank you very much for your courage in sharing that with us. It's 5 to 10. We're going to finish by 10 o'clock. It's 5 minutes. I'm going to allow 3 questions directed to one panelist, and we'll give the panelist a minute to respond because we must end by 10. Quickly. Go ahead, please.
Yes. Hi, my name is Rabbi Michal Cohen. I'm the executive director of the French Jewish Cultural Center of New York. I said cultural and not cultural because in France, it's called community who already out. So, I don't know if this is a question, but my point is it's not true that the Orthodox Jews don't have contact with non-Jews. We already, 4 years, we are doing the Hanukkah party, the French consulate, and we have contact with French non-Jews, and we have a very, we are successful to explain to non-Jews that as part of our mission is to explain to the non-Jews that Judaism have a mission with the non-Jews. And we have this mission since the Mount Sinai that God asked Moses to educate the non-Jews with the 7 laws of God. And talking about atheism, it's very interesting that in France, somebody told me, I asked him if he believes in God. So he thanks God that I'm
Okay. So Jews do have a responsibility to the non-Jewish world as expressed in the Noahide Covenant. 2 more questions. Go ahead, please. Directed to a panelist.
Hi, Mr. Steiner. You're doing wonderful things for the Jewish people and creating many Jewish marriages and families through your work. But how do you expect Jews to see the importance and the crucial life goal of marrying other Jews, having Jewish families without halacha, without ritual that is guiding them from not taking on Jews? It's in the Torah that we're not allowed to marry non-Jews. Why would a secular Jew not take on Jews?
Steiner, you answer?
Well, first let's talk about reality. 55 or 60% of non-Orthodox marriages today are to non-Jews.
That's the problem.
6 or 7% of Orthodox marriages are to non-Jews. So, someone say something?
Okay, I'm just repeating your statistic.
So this is something that's been going on for a long time, and that rate is probably near or at its high. And I don't think I can envisage anything in the future that will meaningfully reduce that number, because the non-Orthodox Jewish community is increasingly American and decreasingly Jewish, in part because of quality of Jewish education in the non-Orthodox world. So halakha, as I think you know, bears very little impact in the non-Orthodox world. And that is not something that I focus on. I focus on bringing Jewish values and a Jewish spirituality, in part through birthright, in part through a lot of other things that I do. And I think that is helpful. There was a recent study that showed that amongst birthright graduates, about 75% of them married other Jews, compared with a like sample of people from the same age group, where around 40-some-odd% of them that's after 10 days only of a birthright trip, compared with as much as 10 years of school education. I'm not sure what it says about the 10 days, but it certainly doesn't say much about the 10 years.
Okay. We're going to have a final question. Go ahead, please.
I think in this country, from my viewpoint, that there is grave concern for the continuation and the continuity of Jewish identity, and that concerns me greatly. I think in America, the only hope for our offspring to remain Jews, to stay as Jews, committed Jews committed to Torah, committed to Torah, Israel, and all things Jewish is Jewish day school. Let me just finish. You commendably spend a lot of money for charter schools, but charter schools are devoid of any essence of Yiddishkeit. They do not imbue in a child that spark of Yiddishkeit, of Judaism, to maintain, to keep our tradition, our heritage, our cultures, our belief in God. The one great gift that we gave to this world, monotheism, will not be perpetuated in a cultural school where 40% of the children are Gentile. We must provide our money, I believe, to Jews. Not enough people with means are supporting our Jewish day schools, which is the only future for our children and for our children.
And at the risk of being a little bit nasty, I would say to you, sir, that ignorance is bliss, frankly. 3%, don't look at me that way, 3% of the non-Orthodox Jewish community goes to day schools. 3%. Let me finish. I started the dominant organization to promote day school education. Day school education. And it's a very good organization. And I started it 13 or 14 years ago. And after all that, 3%, do you want me to say it a third time? Of the non-Orthodox children in America go to day schools. And you can say it's a matter of money, you can say it's a matter of a lot of things, and whatever you say will likely be wrong. The fact is, it's a matter that the non-Orthodox world is not interested in religious schools.